Hey, PSY213 students, this is the first of several online lectures. Unfortunately, this is where we are. So what I'm going to talk about in this video is encoding, and I'll take you through each of these little bubbles here. And of course, you can play the Prezi whenever you want to follow along if you want, or go back. But first, we're going to start talking about encoding. And if you remember, it's been a little while, but I set this up last time. In our lecture, we talked about the stages in which memory, or information rather, goes through processing in memory. So we talked about last time paying attention to things. So we had that lecture on attention in memory. Well, here today we're going to be talking about encoding. What you do with the information in working memory matters for how well or whether something will actually be put into long-term memory and remembered at a later time, right? So that's what we're going to be talking about today, is this encoding processes, okay? So it really starts with, types of encoding really start with Craik and Lockhart. In 1972, they had a theory called the levels of processing theory, and this was a theory of memory that had a couple of points to it. For one, they said that memory was a unitary memory system, meaning it was just one big thing, this thing called memory. And they said memorability was dependent on how deeply information was processed or encoded. So they basically set up this idea that how you encode something determines whether or not it's going to be remembered. So that what they would say is if you forget something, well, then it was encoded shallowly. So here they created three different kinds of encoding. So for example, structural or shallow encoding. And keep in mind now that the frame of reference here, most of the studies on memory involve words or learning word lists. So a lot of the evidence that we'll see is focused around those kinds of research studies. So under this context of word list learning, a shallow form of encoding would be if you were asked the question. Now this is happening at the time that you're studying. How many syllables does the word have? So, and it doesn't really matter what your answer is to this question, but the point is that you're thinking about, when you're studying the words initially, how many syllables does the word have? So this would be a very shallow encoding. You could also ask, does it have the letter E in it? In your Willingham 2003A reading, you're going to see this reference, or hopefully you've read that paper. If not, go back and look at it. You could count the number of vowels. You could judge whether the word was in a particular font. Is it Times New Roman? Is it Helvetica? Again, these are all tasks that are drawing attention to what the information looks like. This is what we would call structural or shallow encoding. You could ask a different question though. This is a phonetic, sort of an intermediate form of encoding. And in this case, the question focuses you on what the word sounds like. So does the word rhyme with ring? Again, it doesn't matter whether you're answering yes or no. It's what you're thinking about that's important, not the answer to this question. And then they created sort of this, or they postulated that there's this semantic or deep form of encoding where you're thinking about the meaning of the word. So like you could ask people to generate synonyms for the study word, right? You could also ask if the word is pleasant or unpleasant. You could ask how much do you like what the word refers to? So do you like it? Is it bigger than a computer monitor, right? So you're thinking again about the meaning of the word. Any of those kinds of questions that focus you on the meaning of the word would be an example of semantic or deep form of processing. So what they suggested here, just to wrap back around to the memory, is that if you encode something shallowly, you should remember that less than if you encoded something with a deep processing task, right? That's the basic idea here. So what's the evidence for this? Well, one of the key studies was this Rogers, Coupier, and Kirker study in 1977. What they did is they had participants study 40 adjectives, and they were broken up into blocks of 10 such that each block was encoded with a different question. Now remember, encoding is synonymous with studying, so this is happening the first time that they're encountering these adjectives. So one block of adjectives they were asked was the adjective printed in capital letters. So here's where you can pause the video and sort of think about what encoding type that is. I'll go through each one of these and then I'll come back to the different types. So did the adjective rhyme with a particular word? Was the adjective a synonym for a particular word? Or does the adjective describe you? So this was not in that first slide that I talked about, but this is something that Rogers et al. Called self-referential encoding. We're going to come back to that concept at the end of this lecture here. So if you thought that this adjective printed in capital letters was structural, you're right. If you thought this was a rhyming or phonetic encoding, that's right. And if you thought this was a semantic or deep sort of form of encoding, you're right. That's basically maps right on to that Craik and Lockhart concept. So now people did a test. So they were asked to just recall the adjectives that they had studied. So you should be able to predict which ones they're going to remember more. So go ahead and try to predict which ones they would remember more, and then I'm going to show you the data and see if you can sort of predict what was going to happen here. So here's the data, and here's the evidence from there. So if you see that they remembered the least amount of adjectives encoded with structural, then you had phonetic, then you had some semantic, and they remembered the most in the self-referential condition. The point here is that you notice this straight sort of linear increase in the amount of items remembered. So the deeper the task, the more that you remember. And this is evidence that indeed what you do with the information really matters, right? So this has been replicated many times over, so much so that it's just a constant known fact within memory research that what you do with the information while you're encoding really matters. And controlling that is really important, as we'll get into when I talk about encoding today. So there's some limits to this concept, this levels of processing theory that Craik and Lockhart proposed. And one of those, are the classic challenging evidence here, comes from Morse, Bransford, and Franks. And so what they did is they did a particular experiment, and they set up two encoding tests. One was phonetic, does it rhyme with a particular word, and so the other one was semantic, does it fit into a sentence. Now if you're following along here, you should immediately recognize that these were two of the types of encoding that Craik and Lockhart identified, and that semantic is a deeper form of encoding than phonetic. So that means that our memory should be better for the semantic tasks, or words that are encoded with a semantic task, than words that are encoded with a phonetic task. Well, Morse, Bransford, and Franks, what they did is they had two kinds of tests: recognition, where they were presented a whole bunch of, so this means detecting old from new. So they were presented a whole bunch of words, and people were instructed to go through and circle any words that were old. So you're identifying which words were old from a bunch of words that were also new. Then they had a rhyming task, where in this task you were asked to circle words that rhymed with whatever words were presented, right? So now that you should be able to make predictions. So what do you think happened on the recognition test? It happened, the results were just what Craik and Lockhart would expect, right? Semantic encoding was produced better memory, better recognition than phonetic encoding, right? So that so far is not surprising. But look down here on the rhyming test though, phonetic encoding was better than semantic encoding. So Craik and Lockhart really couldn't explain that, because this should be a deeper task, should promote better memory than the phonetic task, right? So what Morse, Bransford, and Franks, what they concluded here is that remembering really is, it's really about the match between encoding processes and retrieval processes, right? So in other words, it's not just that deep encoding yields better memory. Most of the time it does, but it depends on what the task or the test is asking for, right? In this case, in the rhyming test, you're testing information about what the words sounded like, so the phonetic coding actually does better, because there's a greater degree of match between the encoding process and what you're retrieving, or what you're asking for at the time of remembering. Now this is something called transfer appropriate processing. They call it transfer appropriate processing. We'll see examples of this in our later lectures. There's also a document in Canvas. I'll make sure there's a link to it in the module for you that gives you more information about transfer appropriate processing. So it gives you another walk through this information. So a couple of problems with this levels of processing theory. Remember, it's a theory, so one process is it didn't explain, like the Morris, Bransford, and Frank's data, where the match was between encoding and retrieval was really important. A couple other issues, though. The definitions were vague and somewhat circular. So what's shallow? So it's hard to identify what a task is going to be shallow. Generally, you have to base it on their performance. So it's a shallow task if you don't remember much of it. What's a deep task? Well, a deep task is one that you remember a lot of. So this gets into a kind of a circular definitions. It's hard to come up with definitions in advance of what's shallow and what's deep. So that's a problem for the theory. The other thing is, remember I said that this theory, they propose that there's only one type of memory, just a big unitary memory. Well, the evidence started to emerge that really we have this difference between working memory and long-term memory. And so as a theory, Craik and Lockhart's levels of processing theory, as a theory of memory, it fails. But in terms of telling us about encoding, we still use it quite a lot today, or at least we use the ideas still today. So how do we use it today? Well, one thing is, and I sort of alluded to this, if we're interested in studying retrieval processes or maybe even consolidation, we're going to ask people to use a particular task to encode the items, because this will control encoding processes by using the same task. In other words, it creates memories of the same strength. So we'll use all of the same tasks. We'll have you either do a deep task or shallow task. Just depends on the research question, but we'll control encoding. We don't just leave it up to the research subject, because then some research subjects might do a deep task, other research subjects might do a shallow task, and they would have differing strengths of memories, right? In some cases, you might want to manipulate that, right? In some cases, you might want to study weak memories. So we have a line of research in my lab where we're looking at very weak memories, and so all of our tasks would involve shallow processing, like counting vowels, or does it have an E in it? Because that's what we're interested in. We're interested in, when you have these weak memories, how do they work? In other cases, we might want to promote and study strong memories. In that case, we're going to use a deep task, right? So if you're in, I have another line of research that does that as well. So we would use deeper tasks to investigate memories of this kind. The other thing that is happening sort of today, remember the self-focus encoding improves memory? That was that, and that Rogers et al. So that when you connect the adjectives to yourself, you remember them a lot better. Well, we had some recent work that sort of looked at this phenomena, and just to give you an idea of encoding processes that we're sort of still learning or still exploring today. So what we did is we looked at it in the terms of source memory. So at study, let me explain the study. So at study, during encoding, participants heard words in either a male voice or a female voice. And we varied the encoding task. In one task, the self-focus condition, people were asked, do you like the word? So they were thinking about themselves. How do I like the word, or do I not like the word? In the other focus condition, they were asked, does the speaker like the word? So based on their voice inflection, they had to sort of determine whether or not the speaker really liked the word or not. Again, it didn't matter what their decision was. It was just important that they made a judgment and were thinking about this information. Now at test, they were asked to make a source judgment. So they were asked to decide whether the male voice said it, or the female voice said it, or if it was new. That's what we call a source memory task. So this is memory for the origin of information. This is a concept we'll develop a little bit later in our lectures. Now, when you're doing this, you can calculate a recognition score. So remember, recognition is just determining whether it was old or new. So what you can do is you can look at what they called it. If they called it old, regardless of what voice, then that's our measure of recognition. So when looking at the results, we can look at our recognition measure. So they're just able to identify that it was a studied item, ignoring whether they got the source right or not. If you look at self-focus encoding relative to other focus encoding, they remembered more in the self-focus versus the other focus encoding. So when you connect the information to yourself, like self-referential, it produces better memory. This is just like the Rogers et al. Study. What we found, though, is that if you looked at the source measure, so how many times they got the speaker's voice right, Well, if you notice, we have a reverse pattern here. In fact, this is statistically significant. In the other focus coding, they remembered more of the speaker, right? Because presumably they were focused on the speaker's voice when they were encoding. So this is just like that transfer appropriate processing concept, but applied to source monitoring and showing that self-focus coding does not always produce better memory. It does in most cases, but it really depends on what the information that's needed during retrieval. So like in this case, when you're trying to remember who said it, it's actually better to focus on that other person and not just focus on yourself. So some other aspects of encoding today, well, it has relevance to your learning, right? What it suggests is that how you study the information really matters. So if you want to remember information for like your courses, for tests, for assignments, use a deep task, right? And this is essentially the whole purpose of this Willingham 2003A paper, where he sort of goes through and talks about that. And you can maybe leave some of your examples in the threaded discussion. And again, I'm going to put a link up and give you instructions on all of that, but go in and maybe reflect a little bit or connect that paper to maybe some experiences that you've had. But the idea here is if you want to do better academically, use a deep task, because that's going to promote better learning. And even better than that, study to prepare for the test. What kind of information is going to be asked at the time of test? Preparing or creating information and studying them the way in which you're going to be tested is much better, right? Now, often this is a good point to sort of talk about. There's a theory in educational research about learning styles, right? So you've heard about this, where you might have visual learners and auditory learners and kinesthetic learners. Well, the truth is that that's pretty much a myth. And I can send you to some papers that look at meta-analyses and basically try to find evidence for learning styles affecting memory, and it doesn't really affect memory. So the reality is, think of it this way. We are all visual, auditory, and kinesthetic learners. You just need to figure out and experience the information in multiple modalities. That's actually going to contribute to better memory. But the key here is focus on how you're going to be tested. And I have a good example of this. So there was one point in time where Owen was learning vocabulary, and he wasn't doing very well on the vocabulary quizzes. And I asked him how the teacher was testing them. And the teacher was testing them by asking them to form sentences. Well, it turns out that Owen was studying just the raw definition of the word. He wasn't practicing forming sentences. So to do better, I encouraged him to change his learning style. And the fact, what he should do is not only study the definition, but create sentences, practice creating sentences, because that's how he was going to be tested. He started doing that, did much better. His performance scores on those vocabulary quizzes improved. So the key here is select the encoding style that's best matched to how you're going to be tested, and that will give you the best results.